Hello, everybody. This is Jimmy. You haven't been reading with Jimmy. You're reading with Jimmy. This is the Canterbury Tales by Geoffrey Chaucer. It's poetry translated by Theodore Morrison, and we're going to be reading the Franklin's Tale. Ready? This has a prologue. Many of the tales have prologues. The old chivalric Bretons in their days wrote various romances known as lays. In rhyme, in their original Breton tongue, these lays to the sound of instruments were sung, or read if the company were so inclined, and one of these old lays I have in mind. Now, who's the I? This is the Franklin's prologue, so the Franklin is speaking. Jimmy put a note up here. A Franklin is a landowner who's free, but he's not of noble birth. And that's what we're talking about here. The Bretons are an ethnic group of Brittany, northwest France, tracing their heritage to the Celtic Britons who migrated from southwest Great Britain. Ready? So it's what I have in mind, which I will say with what good will I can. But, sirs, because I am an ignorant man, here at the very outset I beseech, forgive me for the rudeness of my speech. The study of rhetoric never was my care, and the things I say, they must be plain and bare. I never on Parnassus slept. I know nothing of Marcus Tullius Cicero. So in Greek mythology, Parnassus was a sacred mountain where the muses, that's where the muses were the people who gave you inspiration for poetry and such. So basically the Franklin is, I'm just a regular guy. The only colors I can recognize grow in the fields, or they come from paints or dyes. And other hues I find remote and strange, and colors of rhetoric are beyond my range. To all such matters my responses fail, but if you like, you may listen to my tale. So that's his little introduction, and this is his tale. Once, in Armagh or Brittany, there lived a knight who labored busily to serve a lady as best as he could devise many an exploit and great enterprise. He undertook before she would be won, for she was fair as any under the sun, and came of kindred of so high a sphere that scarcely had this knight the heart for fear to tell his pain. At last, his worthiness, and most of all his mild submissiveness, upon her secret heart contrived to bring so deep a pity for his suffering, and that the lady was ready with all her full accord to take him for her husband and her lord. In lordship, such as men have over their wives, and in the greater bliss to lead their lives, he pledged her for by his free will as a knight, that he would never, by darkness or daylight, against her will assert his sovereignty, or put on the least show of jealousy, but rather obey her will in all he could, as any lover with his lady should, except that his authority and name he would preserve, and that he must do for shame. And she thanked him, and with great humility she answered him, Sir, since you offer me a free rein, as you generously do. Remember, there's a lot of talk in these tales about sovereignty. May God forbid that ever between us two, through fault of mine, there should be any strife. Sir, I will be your true, your humble wife. I swear until my heart bursts in my breast. Jimmy wrote a note. They make a pledge to each other. And so they were both at ease, and they lived in rest. For one thing, sirs, who's talking? The Franklin. In safety, I dare say, one friend must let another have his way, or not for long will friends keep company. Love will not be constrained. Authority no sooner comes than with the clap of a wing, farewell. Love's gone and God is gone. Love is a thing as any spirit free. All women crave freedom by nature, not like some bond slave to be held in subjugation. And so, too, should I confess the whole truth, we men do. In love, the most forbearing man does best. He has the advantage over all the rest. Great merit lies in patience, every way, for it can conquer. There's a pronoun, it. What is it? Something to think about. As the learned say, points that assertiveness can never gain. Forbearing is a patient and restrained forbearing, but it points that assertiveness can never gain. At every word a man may not complain. Learn to forbear, or else, as our lives go, you'll learn as much whether you will or no. There's not a living soul, be sure of this, who sometimes does not do or speak amiss. So he's basically encouraging patience. Anger or sickness, or the star's position, wine, woe, or change of bodily condition, cause many an act of haste, of word, or spite. No man can be avenged for every slight, and to all who have a touch of self-command, the time must tell whether to yield or stand. If you analyze these tales with Jimmy, you'll often find Jimmy referring to a rubber band. Keep that in mind. The time must tell whether to yield or to stand, to pull or to be pulled. This worthy knight, wise in such ways as these, pledged her his patience for a life of ease, and she on her side undertook to swear no fault of hers would give him any cause for care. Both wise and humble was this true accord, and so she took her servant and her lord, in love her servant and her lord in marriage. He lord and servant both? But why disparage his state of service? Disparage his state of service. Disparage, why represent as being of little worth? It was of high above, for he had both his lady and his love, and his lady, as she long had been, and now his wife too, as the laws of love allow. And in this comfort that defines all telling, he took her home, near Penmark, to his dwelling. A year and more they dwelt together thus, until this night known as Arveragus, there's his name, right? Arveragus, resolved to go and live a year or two in England, for the exploits he might do in arms. On such an honorable part for his arduousness he set his heart, the state of being difficult, laborious, that's what arduous means, right? Arveragus. So he decides he's going to go to England for a couple of years to fight. But now, to speak of Dorigen, his wife, now we have her name, who loved her husband as her heart's own life. She sighed and mourned his absence past all measure, as wives do nobly when it gives them pleasure. She couldn't sleep. She fasted and complained, and longing for his presence so constrained her heart that all the world seemed bleak and bare. Her friends, who were acquainted with her care, gave her such consolation as friends may, haranguing her and urging night and day that she was killing herself quite needlessly. And every kind of comfort that there can be, they piled on her and proffered her early and late to make her give up her unhappy state. Little by little, as everybody knows, a man may chisel stone until it shows in time some figure graven on its face. And so in time her boundless grief gave place. And what with hope and reason's ministration, care, she took the imprint of their consolation. So they wear her down. Arveragus, in the midst of all her care, sent letters home to tell her of his welfare, and he promised quickly to come back again, or else his heart would break for Dorigen. Her friends saw that her grief began to slake, to satisfy. And so on their knees they begged her, for God's sake, to join their company and stroll and play and drive her gloomy fantasies away. And finally, she granted their request, and seeing that her consent was for the best. Her castle stood on the ground close by the sea, and walking with her friends for company, and looking out from where the cliffs rose high, she saw the barges and the ships pass by, sailing their course wherever they chose to go. But this became a portion of her woe, and for often to her, alas, she said, is there no single ship of all that I see that will bring my lord home? Were we not apart, all healed would be my bitterness of heart. Or on the cliffside she would sit and think, at other times and look down from the brink, and when she saw that the ledges black and drear, she scarcely could support herself for fear, and sinking down with cold sighs on the turf, she piteously stared at the white surf. Eternal God, she said, whose providence governs the world in your omnipotence, and make no idle thing as men declare, but Lord, these grisly ledges black and bare, that rather in their fiendish desolation seem a foul chaos than a fair creation. By such a perfect God, steadfast and wise, why have you wrought this work that so defies all reason? By it, whether west or east, it is fostered neither man nor bird nor beast. Not good but harm comes of it, to my thought. Do you see the deaths that these rocks have wrought? 100,000 bodies of mankind, Lord, they have slain and banished out of mine. And yet your work so fair, apart was man, you made him in your likeness. By your plan, it seemed to you, felt great partiality toward man at first. But then, how can it be that you create our means of overthrow, and means that bring no good, but only woe? Well, do I know the learned are content to prove all that is best by argument, for reasons, as they say, beyond my knowing? But may God, the God who set the wind to blowing, keep my Lord safe. On that point I will rest, and let the learned argue about what is best. But these black rocks, Lord, that you deigned them to make in hell, I would that they were sunken for his sake. These ledges, they kill my very heart for fear. He's afraid he's going to crash on the rocks, right? So she would say with many a piteous tear. Her friends perceived it, and gave her no relief to ramble by the sea, but rather grief. And so they took her elsewhere for diversion, and they went many a countryside excursion to springs and rivers that were thought entrancing. They played chess, backgammon, and they went dancing. And one morning, when provisioned for the day, they set out for a garden, and it was May. May that had painted with gentle showers this garden with all hues and leaves and flowers, and men had laid it out by artifice. With such a great skill as I hoped for bliss, no garden was so fair at any price, unless it were for certain paradise. The odor of the flowers, fresh to sight, might well have been the loveliest heart feel light. You see how he paints, the narrator is painting a picture with words. Remember, there's no television. That ever was born in this world, unless disease or great grief ruled to its excess. Delight so filled the place at every glance. And after their dinner they began to dance and sing, except for Dorigen, who still forlorn within her heart could never cease to mourn, not seeing him among the dancers go, who was her husband and her love also. Now in this dance among the other men, a squire danced in view of Dorigen, jollier in appearance and more gay, Or so I judged then every month of May. He sang, he danced, better than any man, who is or has been since the world began. And if to picture him I could contrive, he was among the handsomest men alive, young, strong, full of courage, rich and wise, and well regarded. Briefly, to disguise no truth, this lusty squire, all quite unknown to Dorigen herself, loved her alone above all creatures. Jimmy wrote a note. Oh. So this squire, this handsome squire, loves Dorigen alone. In other words, he loves her from a distance. He did not dare to tell his pain. He had fallen in despair. Cupless, he drank his grief. He dared not say a word except in songs, and he would betray somewhat in them, in general, how he burned, saying that he loved and found love unreturned, and made upon this theme in sundry ways complaints and songs, rondels and virelays. His grief, he said, he did not dare to tell, but he languished as a fury does in hell. The Furies were from Greek mythology, and you should read about them. There's a little note here. You can put me on pause and read that. He said that he would die as Echo did. For her Narcissus, all her passion hid. Now remember, Franklin said he's not educated, but he's using a lot of allusions to Greek mythology that you should be aware of. These were the only clues he dared to chance, except perhaps that sometimes at a dance it may well be that he looked into her face in such style as a man who pleads for grace. But she knew nothing of all of his intent. And yet before the company all went, while they were in the garden, it befell, since he was one of whom the world spoke well, that a neighbor too, whom she had known before, that they began to talk. And more he approached his purpose with her, saying thus, this handsome squire known as Aurelius. So there's the squire's name, Aurelius. He said, Madame, if I might hope to please your heart, by God, who made the earth and seas, I wish that duty of your Arveragus went on his voyage. I, Aurelius, had gone whence I should never again return. For well I know that all in vain I burn. My one reward is but my breaking heart. Madame, take pity on my sorrows smart. A word of yours can slay me or save. Here at your feet, would God I found my grave. I have no time to spend on further breath. Have mercy, sweet, or will you cause my death? She looked, and these words, and Aurelius, is this your drift? She said. Do you speak thus? Never before have I known what you meant. But now, Aurelius, I see your intent. But by the very God, you gave me soul and life, and never shall I become an untrue wife. In word or work, with all my strength of wit, I will be his, to whom I have been knit. That's all the answer you shall get from me. But afterwards she told him jokingly, Aurelius, by Almighty God above, I promise you that I will be your love, since your complaint is pitiable. I see that the day when from the length of Brittany you move the rocks and the ledges without fail, and leave no stone to stop a coasting sail, I say that when you have made the coast so clean of rocks that there's no stone left to be seen, then I will love you best as any man. This pledge I keep as well as ever I can. So she makes him a pledge. If you get rid of those rocks, why does she want him to get rid of the rocks? You know why. So they don't interfere with her husband's return, right? Arveragus. Is there no other grace in you? Said Aurelius. No, by the Lord, she answered, who made me. I know all this will never come about, this folly in your heart. Go cast it out. What pleasure can a man take in his life falling in love with someone else's wife? who has her body freely at his will. Aurelius felt his heart with sorrow fill. This is impossible, he said, and I, madame, at once and horribly must die. And so home to his house he went in mortal hurt. He saw that it was past him to avert his death, and he felt his heart already cold. On bare knees sinking, he began to hold his hands toward heaven, and quite out of his head he implored the gods, not knowing what he said. Lord, of all growing things, who in your power give times and seasons to each herb and flower, according to your station in the sky, Phobos, Apollo, he said, look with a pitying eye on me, Aurelius, and I'm wretched and forlorn, and whose death lord by his lady has been sworn. For I know well that if you so incline, you can help this failing heart of mine, say for my lady. Vouchsafe that I may say, give that I may say, Phobos, with help I need, and in what way? Your sister, the fair Luna, the moon, she, the goddess of the ocean and the queen, though Neptune is the ocean's deity. For the Franklin said he's not educated. He knows a lot about mythology, doesn't he? Yet impress over him in turn is she. You well know, Lord, that just as her desire is to be quickened and lit by her fire, for which she follows you so busily, even so the sea desires naturally to follow her, the goddess, over all oceans and rivers, great and small. Wherefore, Lord Apollo, Phobos, this is my petition. When next she faces you in opposition in Leo, pray that her, and by her grace, to hide 5 phantoms deep beneath the great flood tide, the highest rock on the coast of Brittany. Lord Phobos, do this miracle for me. So he's praying to hide the rocks. Then truly to my lady may I say, now keep your promise, the rocks are all away. Implore your sister for 2 years to run her journey at the same pace as the sun, and then facing you, she will be full and bright as always, and springtide will last the day and night, and let flood tide last 2 years. If in this way she will not make my lady mine, then I pray that she will sink each last rock underground into her own dark realm, where she is bound to Pluto, the god of the underworld. And on bare feet I will seek your Delphine temple. The tears upon my cheek, see, take pity. Do not look askance. With this he swooned and fell down in a trance. His brother took him up and to his bed brought him, distracted both in heart and head. And there, for my part, I will let him lie and choose himself whether to live or die. So this is interesting. The Franklin says, I'm going to let him lay in bed for a while. In welfare and great honor through the sea, as if he were the flower of chivalry, Arveragus, with other worthy men, came safely home. Oh, happy Dorigen, who took her husband in her arms once more, and the lusty knight, the worthy man of war, who loved her as he loved his own heart's life. He nourished no suspicions of his wife, and in his absence someone had undertaken to talk love to her that left his faith unshaken. For questions such as these he had no leisure. He jousted and he danced and he labored for her pleasure. And so I leave them in their bliss to dwell, and of the sick Aurelius I will tell. So he comes home, they're happy, he doesn't have any doubts about her loyalty, right? Her devotion. Now he goes back to Aurelius. Wasting time, wasting with grief, Aurelius lay bound 2 years before he could set foot on ground. Whoa! 2 years in bed. Can you imagine that? To no one could he have hope of turning for help except his brother, a man of learning, and the only living soul who had ever heard his toil and trouble, even by a word. For he had kept his love more tightly hid than Pampilius or Galatia did. To outward view, his breast looked whole and clean, but in his heart the arrow rankled clean. What arrow is that? Cupid's arrow, right? And wounds, as well as you know, that seem to heal are dangerous unless the surgeon's steel can reach the arrow. His brother, by good chance, recalled at last that when he was in France, at Orleans, as in every nook and cranny young students like to dwell for the uncanny, and lore that leads them well out of their way, while he was studying, he once saw a book of natural magic, which a friend, who was at Orleans for another end, the study of law, had left in spite of all upon his desk. And he started to recall this book, this magic book, and spoke much of the operations founded upon the 28 stations belonging to the moon. So we got some astrology going on. Such stuff as that nonsense in our own day is not worth a gnat, for Holy Church forbids that in our belief. So the Franklin's basically saying we can't talk about astrology, right? Horoscopes. Church doesn't allow that. His heart began to dance for every glee, remembering this book. Immediately, my brother, he told himself, shall find his cure, for there are sciences that I am sure can produce such triumphs of illusion as these magicians work to men's confusions. Magicians, I've heard tell, have brought about a barge into the banquet hall to row at large, and on water, or a lion with a grim head, or they made flowers grow, or grapes both red and white, or they made a castle rise of mortar and stone, and at a chosen moment, poof, gone. Though it appeared to everybody's sight, my thought is this. At Orleans, if I might discover an old school friend who had in mind the manations of the moon, or other kind of natural magic, he could save my brother. For by illusion, one way or another, a learned clerk could make men seem to see, that all the frowning rocks in Brittany were gone, and that the ships were sailing close to shore. And he could make a spell last for a week or more, and then my brother and his love could feast, or breaking her word, she would be shamed. Why should I make it longer of this, said the Franklin. He gave his brother such hope of bliss that he got out of his bed without delay and started off toward Orleans. And on their way, only a little distance from the town, they noticed a young student, sole alone, approaching them, and at a point of meeting, he gave them both a cheerful Latin greeting. And then he said a marvelous thing. He said, I know why you have come here. And they couldn't go another step, had they been so inclined, before he told them all that they had in mind. It's a bit of a mind reader. About his friends of student days long sped, Aurelius's brother asked him, they were dead. The student answered him, at which he wept, and down from the horse's back Aurelius leapt, and went home to his house with this magician. And the luxuries placed at their disposition Aurelius never had seen in all their days. Before they supped, their host put on displays of deer-thronged parks and great stags, antlered high, and the tallest that were ever seen with an eye. Aurelius watched 100 killed by hounds, or bleeding bitterly with arrow wounds. He saw when the deer had vanished into air, and some falconers by the river flowing fair, and by their hawks he watched a heron slain. He saw knights who were jousting on a plain, and he saw his lady as a final pleasure, dancing, and he saw himself too dance with measure. And then the master who had wrought this spell saw it was time, and he clapped his hands and said farewell. The revels were all gone, and they left no trace. Yet from the house they never moved a pace, but they sat still in his study, where on the shelves he kept books, and none except themselves to watch these marvels. He called out to inquire, "Is supper ready?" "Sir," replied the squire, "whenever you like." "Well, we'll sup then. That is the best, for a lover sometimes needs his rest." Then they discussed what his reward should be for removing all the rocks from Brittany. From the Jordan to the outlet of the Seine, he sent a stiff price, swearing by God's pain no less than £1,000 would do. And that sum was hardly enough, he said, to make him come. Aurelius answered, "Tush, £1,000. This whole wide world that men believe in round, I'd offer it to you were I love of it. We're driven a bargain. Yes, our minds are knit. You shall be paid to the last pound, no less. But take care that you don't, for laziness, keep us from starting out at once tomorrow." "Agreed," said the magician, "or else God give me sorrow." Aurelius went to bed when he desired, and slept most of the night, for partly tired, and partly with his new hope or relief. A woeful heart found respite from its grief, and on the morrow, as soon as it was day, to Brittany they took, the nearest way. And according to the books that I remember, this happened in the season of December, frosty and cold, Apollo, Phoebus, in coppery hue, he that in Cancer shone so hot and new. So the Franklin knows a lot about astrology. Like burnished gold, with beams that flowed out bright, and Capricorn that driven to a light. And where he looked old and pale enough, passed out, rain, sleet, bitter frost, had put to rout green things in yards and gardens. In January sat by the fire, with forked beard, making merry, and from his ox horn drinking down the wine. Before him stood the flesh of the tusked swine. And Noel shouted every lusty man. Aurelius, in all points that a host can, ministered to his guest with deference, and he begged him to exert all diligence to save him from his sorrow and his smart. What's his sorrow? He loves her, right? To save him. Or with the sword he swore to pierce his heart. So the scholar felt such pity for this man that night and day he did what cunning can, to learn a time when he could try conclusions and bring forth such a prodigy of illusions, by means of his celestial jugglery. "I have no knowledge of astrology," said the Franklin, "nor of its terms, that she and all would say the rocks had vanished marvelously away from Brittany, or sunk beneath the ground. The most propitious time at last he found, the hour of moonshine and the lunar station, the best to accord his operation. So he knew, with all of his data were complete. Isn't that funny? They talk about data. To work his superstition with deceit, such as men practiced in the heathenish day. He had no further reason for delay, and through his magic for a week or more, it seemed that all the rocks had quit the shore. So the magician performs his illusion. Aurelius, when he knew he had to meet no obstacle, fell at his master's feet. "Grateful am I, sad wretch," he said, "to you, and grateful to my lady Venus, too, for this deliverance." And he set out to visit the temple, where he had no doubt that he would see his lady. And when he thought the time was ripe, humbly, with his heart distraught by fear, he greeted her, this woeful man. Quoth my lady, whom I love as best I can, and most would dread of all earth to displease, but that for you I have so lost all ease, that dead before your feet I must fall down. You never should know why I am woe begone, but truly I must die, or else complain. You kill me for no fault through the very pain. But though to save you, who never have stirred, take care that you would break faith with your word. Repent before you slay me, my love. For, madam, by the very God above, you know well that your promise was not light, Not that I challenge anything of right. For you, my lady, but only through your grace, yet in the garden yonder, you know the place. You are aware of what you promised me, and in my hand you pledged it, fair and free, to love me best. God knows you told me this, although I am unworthy of such bliss. Madam, it is your honor I defend more than my heart's life. Though right now it end. I have done just as you commanded me, and if you are willing, you may go and see. Do as you think best. Keep your pledge in mind, dead or alive, and in the garden you will find my body. In which state is yours to say, whether I'm alive or dead. But certainly the rocks are all away. He took his leave. Astonished in her place, she stood, no drop of blood in her face. She had not dreamt that she would fall for such a trap. She said, alas, this should never happen. It's a gap in nature's order. Never had I thought, she cried, that such a marvel could be wrought, or such a prodigy be possible. And to home she went, a creature sorrowful. To walk was almost more than she could do. She wept and swooned for a whole day or two, and so that it might have moved the hardest eye, but there was none to whom she could tell why. For out of town Arveragus had gone. She spoke alone, within her heart withdrawn, with pale face and with grief instead of cheer, and uttered her complaint, as you shall hear. She said, Fortune, of you must I complain for binding me unwitting in your chain, from which I saw no means of help me fly, except to be dishonored or to die. One of these two I am compelled to choose, but none the less I should far rather lose my life and my body suffer shame. Know myself false or forfeit my fair name, by death for certain I could pay my score. And has not many a faithful wife before, and many a maiden caught in such a mesh, destroyed herself rather than soil her flesh? Yes, true it is. These stories bear me out. When 30 tyrants at a drinking bout in Athens had slain Phaedron, there's a little note, a prominent Athenian citizen killed. Tyrants reportedly forced his daughters to dance over his body before drowning themselves. In their spite, they hailed his daughters in foul delight. Naked and on the pavement made them dance in their sire's blood. God look on them askance. And these unhappy maidens in their dread, rather than lose each one her maidenhead, managed somehow to leap into the well, and there to drown themselves, as the old books tell. Again, from Lacedaemon were required no less than 50 maids, who were desired by the Messenians for their lechery. And not one maiden in the company, but she was slain, and with a good intent chose rather to be slaughtered than consent, and that should she lose by force her maiden head. Of death, then, why should I feel any dread? So she's giving examples of how people guarded their chastity, right? Their maidenhead. She doesn't want to cheat on her husband. Aristocles, in his tyranny, would have defied Symlathus, but she, after her father had been slain one night, straight to Diana's temple took flight, and with her hands clung to the statue there. She would not leave it, and no man could tear her hands away or make her move pace until she had slaughtered in the very place she was slaughtered. And now, since these maidens in such scorn refused by man's foul pleasures to be abused, a wife more should kill herself outright than be defiled by lewd appetite. What shall I say of Hasdruel's true wife, who at the siege of Carthage took her own life? For when she saw that the Romans had the town, she took her children, and with them all leaped down into the fire, and chose to die by flame rather than let the Romans do her shame. And did not Lucretia, from whom Tarquin took by force, at Rome find refuge in the same recourse? She killed herself, thinking it merely shame to go on living when she had lost her name. The 7 maidens of Malthus, too, they destroyed themselves for dread, lest the Gauls do an outrage to them. 1,000 tales or more I could recall. I think upon this score the wife of Arveragus, when he died, in his wounds allowed her blood to glide, and he said, "At last my body shall remain, if I have any choice, without a stain." Think of Acletus, and what a wife she was, and what about Homer and good Penelope? All Greece knows of her long-tried faithfulness. By the way, that's the Odyssey, and that's a great story. Jimmy will read that on the website one day. And of chaste Portia, I can say no less without. She's calling up all these examples of women who killed themselves rather than, right, cheat, be pillaged, who she swore to give her heart entire. What more examples need I multiply? She says, seeing so many have preferred to die rather than suffer foul iniquity. I will conclude the better part of me is to destroy myself rather than be shamed thus. I will be faithful to Arveragus, or else I will contrive some way to die. There's a footnote here. It says, I have somewhat abbreviated and altered Dorigen's complaint, omitting a number of examples to which Chaucer makes only general allusions and transporting her pledge of faithfulness to the end of the speech. That's Theodore Morrison telling you what he did to the translation. Isn't he a nice guy? So Dorigen complained with sorrowing eye a day or two until on the 3rd night Arveragus came home and saw her plight, and he asked her why it was she was weeping. But Dorigen at this wept all the more. Alas, she cried, that I ever was born. Thus have I said, and thus too I have sworn. And so she told him all that you have heard me say. Who's me? Right? That's the Franklin. Her husband answered in the friendliest way and cheerfully, oh, there's nothing further then? No, by God's own truth, said Dorigen. This is too much. I speak under God's will. Now, wife, he said, let things that sleep lie still. All may be well. Who knows this very day? You must keep your promise, that I say. I'd rather be stabbed for very love of you than to see you and your promised word untrue. Talk about a guy who's an understanding guy. I'd rather be stabbed for very love of you than to see you and your promised word untrue. Truth is the highest thing within a man's keeping, he tells her. But as he said this word, he burst out weeping, and he charged her, I forbid on pain of death that for as long as time as you draw breath, that you let this thing be known to any man. I will endure my grief as best I can, or wear a downcast look. These people guess that you have borne a blow or a distress. And he called a squire from among his men, also a maid, and he said, go with Dorigen to such a place, he told them. They set out in ignorance of what the errand was. And now many of you may think, well, in fact, that he was a lewd fellow in this act, willing to risk his wife to such a fate. But wait, hear the tale before you judge her. Wait. She may have better luck than you have guessed. Hark to the tale, and then judge you think the best. So there's a little pause here. Don't judge this guy yet, right? So this Amoris Aurelius chanced to meet Dorigen in the town's most crowded street, bound for the garden, full of his intent. He was ready. He greeted her, and he asked her where she went, distractedly as if she were half mad. She said, to the garden, as my husband bade, to keep my promise. There, alas, alas. Aurelius felt a great compassion pass into his heart, and wondering at this, turned, pitied her, and her worthy knight's concern that should keep that promise that she had spoken. So loath he was to see his wife's word broken on all sides, it seemed better to this squire, for pity's sake, to abandon his desire. So suddenly Aurelius has a change of heart. rather than to act so base and mean a part against all generous chivalry of heart. And so in a few words he answered, Madam, say to your lord Arveragus that since I can perceive his nobleness toward you, and since I see your great distress, I should far rather suffer woe forever than the great love between you mar or sever. Into your hand and with great surety paid, whatever bond or promise you've made, I now release you, and I give you my word, I will never charge you a pledge deferred, and take my leave of the best and truest wife that I've ever met in all my life. But what they promise, let them wives take care, and let them remember Dorigen, and beware that thus a squire can perform a generous act, as well as a knight can, and that's a fact. She thanked Aurelius, kneeling on her bare knees, and then she went home to her husband well at ease, and she told him that all you have heard me say, and it was enough, be certain, to repay Arveragus beyond my power to tell. What longer on this matter should I dwell? Arveragus and Dorigen, his wife, in sovereign happiness took up their life. No difference netted them or came between them. He cherished her as though she were a queen. And she, true forever as before, of these two you shall hear from me no more. Now Aurelius, who had lost his whole outlay, wished that his eyes had never seen the day. At last he said, I promised to confer 1,000 pounds on this philosopher. Pure gold, true weight. What am I going to do now? I see that I'm ruined through and through. There's nothing for it but to go and sell my whole estate and beg. I cannot dwell shaming my kinfolk longer in this place, unless I can induce him to show me grace. I'll ask him, though, if he will let me pay year after year, by given month and day, and thank his bounty for the privilege. So I won't play false with him. I will keep my pledge. From such funds as his coffers chanced to hold, he carried the magician sums of gold, maybe 500 pounds worth at the most, and he begged for time. Master, I dare to boast, he said, that I have never failed the promise yet, and you may be sure that I shall pay my debt, however I fare, however I may be hurt, though I'm reduced to begging in my shirt. But if you would just consent, on surety, to give me a respite, say 2 years or 3, that I could manage. If not, I must sell all that my father has, truth to tell. Have I not done you as I agreed? Asked the magician soberly. Indeed, truly you have, Aurelius said. Have you not had your lady? No, Aurelius sighed. Well, what is the reason? Tell me if you can. And thereupon Aurelius began. Arveragus, for his knightliness, would rather have died, he said, in his distress than to see his wife her promised word undo. He told him Dorigen's reluctance too, and how loth she was to be a faithless wife, and how she would rather have given up her life, and how guilelessly, since she had never heard of such illusions, she had never pledged her word. And for this I pitied her, Aurelius said, and just as he freely and nobly sent his wife to me, I sent her freely back in the same way, and so it stands. I have no more to say. The magician, hearing this, replied, Dear brother, each of you acted nobly toward the other. You're a squire. Arveragus is a knight, and yet God forbid that such a scholar might in his turn do a generous act, as well as any of you in sober fact. Sir, I forgive your debt to the last pound, as if you had just now popped out of the ground, and never even until this moment heard of me. You shall not pay a penny. Go free. In spite of all my toil and all my art, you've lodged and fed me well, and for my part, it's enough. God bless you, and good day. And so he took his horse, and he rode away. So now, sirs, here is a nice case to be tried. Which of them was most generous? That's the question. You decide before we go further on our journey. My tale's done. I've told you all I know. Wow. There's a little note here in brackets from Theodore Morrison. Let's read a little bit of it. One of the manuscript fragments of the Canterbury Tales consists of the second nun's prologue and tale. So now he's going on and talking about other fragments. Because remember, no one has the complete Canterbury Tales. You'll learn this in your analysis when we talk about this. So he goes on, and you can pause me and read this for yourself. But I think, I just want to call your attention to this. Another manuscript fragment consists of the physician's tale and the partner's prologue and tale. And since Chaucer did not complete the Canterbury Tales and therefore did not give them any final arrangement, I have not hesitated to put the partner's tale at the climactic point toward the end, although the editors of Chaucer's text put it earlier. Remember what Jimmy tells you in the analysis. Sometimes translators agree, disagree, and when they're translating fragments, sometimes they uncover a new manuscript. And so I tell you, when we analyze these things and when you read them with Jimmy, that it's really up to you in the order you want to read them. They make sense if you want to read them in the order. I can give you the order. It starts with the Knight's Tale, right? And then it goes to the prologue of the Miller's Tale, then the Miller's Tale, then the prologue to the Reeve's Tale, etc. But I'll publish that in one of my analyses. For now, I want you to know that these can be read in any way, and you just read the Franklin's Tale. So these, and I just have another little fragment here. You can pause me and read this if you'd like to. It's not that important. So these are the words of the host to the physician and the partner. We read the partner's tale. It's on this website. Help, by Christ's nails and blood, said our host, began, swearing as though beside himself. This man was a false rascal, and false judge as well. The shamefullest death that every tongue can tell fall on such judges and all who give them aid. And yet this guiltless girl was slain. She paid, alas, for all of her beauty too dearly, and hence men may see, I say but too clearly, that the gifts that fortune and nature give bring death to many a soul that else might live. Her beauty and her death, I dare say, alas, she died in such a piteous way. In both the gifts I spoke of now men find harm oftener than profit to my mind. But in all truthfulness, my master dear, this was a pitiable tale to hear. That's the words of the physician to the partner. No matter, let it pass, it's all the same. God gave your gentle flesh and your whole frame, and all your urinals and thunder mugs, your Hippocras, and all your other drugs and all your box of pills that you possess. I pray God and Our Lady Mary bless that you're a man of dignity, if I could tell it. Yes, St. Ronan. Proper as a prelate, have I said, well, I cannot speak in form, but well I know that you took my heart by storm. You almost made me have a heart attack. God's bones. He's pretty ticked off, the host, right? Without a pill to bring it back, or else a drink or moist or corny ale, or unless I write, and you're wondering, what the hell is he talking about? Well, don't worry about it, because you don't really read this. Sir Ninian, he said, it shall be done. But at this tavern here, before my tale, I just go and have some bread and ale. The proper pilgrims in our company cried quickly, let him speak. No ribaldry. Tell him the moral tale, one to make it clear, and some lesson to us will gladly hear. Just as you wish, he said. I'll try to think of something edifying while I drink. Then he goes into the prologue to the partner's tale, which we read on this website. You've been reading with Jimmy. This is Jimmy. My email is jimmy@readingwithjimmy.com, jimmy@readingwithjimmy.com. Thanks for coming by. This has been the Franklin's Tale, one of the Canterbury Tales from Chaucer. What a story, huh? What a story. It's about what? Faithfulness. That's about faithfulness. Thanks for coming. And remember, keep your word. If you're going to give your word, keep your word, no matter what. That's why you don't give your word easily and freely. Keep your word. Remember what you promise. Thanks for coming by.